Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Purdy Insurance. Visit Purdy Insurance on Market Street in Sunbury or visit online at purdyinsurance.com.
Always a pleasure to bring in the outstanding Phil Steele, because people will ask me, do you get any preseason magazines? I always say just one. It's Phil. Big reason why. Pro's pro, but also he outworks everybody. This is not a passive. This is a 24/7, 365. Phil, welcome back. It's so great to have you with us.
Steve, it's always good to hear your voice, my friend. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you. Obviously, in a year like this, since we're going to sit here with Penn State, when you get to Penn State, you have them all over your magazine. A lot of top rankings. So when you've been looking at the Penn State rankings by positions, what are some things that jumped out at you that put you in mind to put Penn State ranked so high at positional rankings?
Well, first of all, defense. Going over the team with Coach Franklin, he pointed out that this is the deepest, most talented defensive line that he's ever had, and he's had some pretty good defensive lines coming in. They actually go three deep across the board at almost every single position on defense. Maybe one or two spots they don't go three deep. Other than that, every single unit three deep. You look at the linebacker core. Last year was inexperienced. This year they're now experienced. And the secondary, this is a unit that finished right at the top of my rankings last year, number 4 DBs at the end of last year, and this year has almost everybody back, including Kalen King. They do lose Joey Porter. They do lose Jair Brown, but they got a lot of guys back. So I think the overall depth on the defense jumped out to me. Offensive line, Coach Franklin told me it had the chance to be one of the better offensive lines he's had. It's one of the better tight end rooms in the country. And, of course, the running backs, how do you go wrong with Nick Singleton, Gatron Allen? And then you add in a guy like Treson Potts, who did a great job in Minnesota. So the thing that I think when I got off the phone with Coach Franklin, going over the squad with him, the thing that jumped out to me, Steve, was depth.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I've been telling fans over and over again. I said it's one thing to look at a really good first 22. A lot of teams have a good first 22. But where are you 23 through 50? And I think that's where Penn State has made the move. Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely, yeah. This is an extremely deep team, and I remember going over the team like in Coach Franklin's first year with them, and they were nowhere near deep, especially on the offensive line. That was a mismatch at that point. And now going over the team with them and seeing what he has third string, a lot of teams would be envious of that.
And no question. Penn State, obviously, the questions that will come up for James Franklin would be getting past Michigan, getting past Ohio State. So let's get to Michigan. When you look at Michigan, McCarthy's back at quarterback, the 2 running backs, but they have a lot of transfers in that offensive line. What did those transfers up front, in your opinion, do to their positional ranking?
Well, the key, you can get Power 5 transfers, and if they don't have the experience level, you wonder about their production. And Steve, going over the team with all the coaches this year, the thing that surprised me, and it's only after you go through every single roster and every single position, was the amount of FCS transfers that made an impact. And I would ask the coaches, I'd say, what's up with that? And the bottom line is this. If you come in with experience at the FCS level and they come in with a chip on their shoulder. But in this case, these Power 5 transfers that Coach Franklin brought in all have massive amounts of experience. I mean, Drake Nugent at center, 12 starts in 21, 12 starts in 22. So he's basically going to be a third-year starter. Ladarius Henderson from Arizona State was a 3-year starter at Arizona State. Miles Hinton from Stanford was a 2-year starter at Stanford. So these are not Power 5 transfers that left because they weren't getting playing time. These are Power 5 transfers that were legitimate starters. And so I think they're going to be able to come in. Their offensive line coach has done a great job. In fact, I'm on the Joe Moore Award Committee. That's the committee I'm most proud to be on, Steve, because I'm the only non-offensive lineman or non-offensive line coach that's even allowed on the committee. But we've given the Joe Moore Award to Michigan each of the last 2 years, and they'll be up there as one of the candidates again this year.
Yeah, that's what struck me because, as you know, I do a lot of off-season work to start getting ready for my games. It was all the transfers that they brought in, Michigan up front, were also from power schools. And that's what struck me about it. And sometimes you'll get a guy, let's take Trey Potts as an example since you brought him up. You know, he goes from Power 5 to Power 5. But, you know, in talking with him, he wants to go someplace. Not just with his career, but also on the winning side of it. And I think that does play a role for some of these teams.
Absolutely. And, you know, look at the two offensive linemen coming over from Stanford. Stanford this year, I've got picked last in the Pac-12. They lost a lot from last year. So stick around Stanford, finish last in the Pac-12, or go to Michigan and perhaps contend for a national championship. And, by the way, I think this may be Jim Harbaugh's best team he's put on the field in his 9 years.
Yeah, and it starts with the quarterback. You know, where do you have the ranking with J.J. McCarthy? Because I feel like of the quarterbacks Jim has had, just, you know, because he's had transfers, but I feel like this is the first one he's really developed from scratch on a collegiate level. What's your opinion on McCarthy?
I think, first of all, we're going to see a much improved J.J. McCarthy this year. And if you go back and watch the games last year, especially early on, they were playing with a leash on J.J. McCarthy. You know, and they could. I mean, you had the offensive line, you had the run game, you had the defensive special teams. Don't go out there and mess it up. I believe they're going to let J.J. McCarthy throw the football downfield more this year. So as last year he threw for 2,700 yards, I would expect more like 3,500 yards. Now, they're not going to abandon the run game. They've got the best set of running backs in the country maybe with Corum, Edwards, Hall, Stokes, Mullings and company. In fact, Corum might have won the Heisman Trophy had he been healthy for the Ohio State game and starred in that thing. But when I look at the quarterback spot, I think J.J. McCarthy is going to be able to throw the football downfield more and be an improved quarterback statistically as they take the reins off a little bit.
Yeah, but when it comes to quarterback room, you were really big on Talia Tagovailoa at Maryland, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, you got to go with the experience level. And Penn State, Ohio State, both do not have that experience level. And with Talia, the one thing is they will let him throw. And last year he threw for 3,000 yards despite missing a start. So, and plus they've got a good backup in Billy Edwards. I was impressed when Edwards came on the field last year in his two games. He's a guy that's got a high football IQ. He's an Andy Dalton type of quarterback, and I think that combination of those two guys at QB gives them a pretty good depth even.
In fact, I think it was the Indiana game he came off the bench because Jack Ham and I were watching that, and Jack looked over at me. He says, "This guy's pretty good. He could start for a lot of teams." Billy's a Wake Forest transfer, something like that, if I recall.
Yeah,
I mean, but that's
Wake Forest. Yeah, 6'3", 215 pounds, and he's a guy that, he's athletic. He's a guy that can run the football. But I thought last year, as you pointed out, you go back to that game that he played, he threw the ball pretty good. He had 61% of his passes last year. You got to like 3 touchdowns and no interceptions.
Yeah. That last number is the number that the coaches love, the no interceptions.
Yep.
Ohio State, Kyle McCord has to step in there. So what's the read when you talk to Ryan Day about what he thinks of Kyle McCord? Because obviously it does not hurt the cause that Marvin Harrison is one of the guys to throw to.
Yeah, and Steve, I talked to 123 of the 133 head coaches, did not talk to Coach Ryan Day, so
gotcha.
Didn't get anything specific from him. However, poor Kyle McCord throwing to Marvin Harrison and Igbuka and Fleming and the recruiting that they do there. It's the best receiving core in the country. In fact, they may have the top 2 receivers in the country. You look at the running back core. Remember last year they got banged up. Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams. They had Chip Trainum was a running back at Arizona State, was playing linebacker for Ohio State, had to move into the running back room where he still is this year. So they're going to be much better there at running back. My concern would be the tackles. They've got 2 new tackles, and I don't know if either one is going to be close to last year. But Kyle McCord will have a good year. And Ohio State first-year starting quarterbacks, I think they've had the best quarterback in the Big Ten 9 of the last 10 years, despite having numerous first-year starters. So at the end of the year, Kyle McCord will probably be a Heisman candidate playing with this offense and that defense. In fact, I rate Ohio State number 2 in my power poll, the second most talented team overall in the country. However, you look at their road games, they got to play Notre Dame on the road. That's not going to be easy. They got to play Wisconsin on the road the week after they play Penn State, and they got to play Michigan on the road. So toughest schedule of the top 3 teams in the Big Ten East.
Yeah, when it came to voting for Player of the Year last year in the Big Ten, I actually voted for Marvin Harrison. I just thought he was that good, but that's just me.
That's a good vote. That's a good vote.
Yeah, they didn't drum me out for it, so that was good. On the national scene, the 3 teams that we just talked about, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, will all play a role on the national scene, but others will play a role as well. So when we go down south and we take a look at the SEC, Georgia and Alabama will be 2 that will come up right away. Are there any legitimate challengers in your mind to them in their respective divisions?
Yeah, I think with Georgia, the big player is going to be Tennessee, and it's going to be, can Joe Milton have a type of year like Hendon Hooker did? Now, NFL scouts are drooling over this guy. I mean, he's 6'5", 242, could throw a football 90 yards. He's been in the offense 3 years, did well in his final 2 starts. But Hendon Hooker, and you pointed it out, coaches love that low final number. He had a 27-2 ratio last year, just 2 interceptions. Can Joe Milton do that? That's going to be the key for them because Tennessee's got a better defense. They get Georgia at home, which is big, but I do have Georgia winning the East. Now, the West, I think there are some contenders. So let's face it, Alabama's an inexperienced squad this year. They only have 5 starters back on offense, 5 on defense, don't even know who their quarterback is. But they get LSU at home, which I think is big. Brian Kelly will have a better team his second year than they did last year, and last year they did beat Bama. And of all the main contenders, there's only 2 that have veteran quarterbacks this year. One is Michigan with McCarthy, and then the other is LSU with Jaden Daniels. And Jaden Daniels, they took the reins off him in the second half of the year, and that's when LSU was playing their best ball. So I think LSU's legitimate contender. And then I'm going to throw a surprise at you, Steve, and that's Texas A&M. And Texas A&M, Texas A&M is my number one most.
I'm laughing because I was just about to ask that question. That's why I'm laughing.
Perfect. Yeah, A&M's my number one most improved team in the country. And when I was talking to Coach Jimbo Fisher and going over the squad with him last year, Steve, we'd get to the end of the position, and I always ask for a recap. And like the offensive line, he said, Phil, we're going to have one of the best offensive lines in the country next year. That next year followed a lot of the categories. Last year they were number 124 in my experience chart, and this year they're all the way up to number 14. And keep in mind, last year they lost their top wide receiver, Anais Smith, after 4 games. They had to start 3 different quarterbacks due to injuries. The defense was banged up. The offensive line was banged up and playing a lot of freshmen. Well, guess what? This year, they're number 14 on my experience chart. They got 10 starters back on offense, 10 on defense. Jimbo Fisher's brought in top recruiting classes that are just like Alabama, just like LSU. In fact, the number 1 recruiting class last year, they now have experience. And last year, these guys waffled through a 5-7 season, Steve, and yet they beat LSU 38-23. And the Alabama game, they played out on the road in Tuscaloosa. Last play of the game, they're down by 4 at the Alabama 2-yard line, throwing with a chance to win the game. They could have beaten Alabama and LSU last year in a 5-7 year. Now they're going to have experience. Now they've got the talent, and I think with Bobby Petrino taking over the play calling, that's going to be a plus. They've got a veteran quarterback now in Wegman. LSU could be that surprise team that wins the West and could be a surprise playoff contender.
Or Texas A&M, yeah.
Texas A&M, sorry about that, yeah.
No, and I agree with you. I mean, that they are, because of last year, people will look at them with skepticism. I think it'll prove out after the opening month that skepticism will go away. That's just me. A year from now, go ahead.
And people were saying about A&M this year, they say everybody's been high on them for the last couple of years. The last time I had them on my surprise team list was 2020. That's the year they almost made the playoff. In fact, they finished number 4 in the country. I have not had them on my surprise team list or most improved list either of the last 2 years.
A year from now when we do this, there'll be other times we'll talk during the year, but a year from now when we do this, we'll be talking about USC going into the Big Ten. Right now, USC is right there in the Pac-12. Where do you see the job Lincoln Riley has done, and especially the job he's done in the transfer portal to form this team?
Yeah, and when I talked to Coach Riley going over his squad with him this year, the defense was our main part of our conversation. He knew they had to improve it. They don't have to be a dominant defensive team, not with Caleb Williams, my number 3 set of receivers, a veteran offensive line, veteran running backs. They're going to put up points. They just have to be good, and I think they can be. He brought in Bear Alexander from Georgia. He was my number 6 rated defensive lineman out of high school. He's 315 pounds in the middle. Anthony Lucas, 295-pound defensive end from Texas A&M, number 6 rated defensive lineman. They brought in Mason Cobb, who was one of the top tacklers at Oklahoma State. One of the top cornerbacks in the Pac-12 last year was Christian Rolla-Wallace from Arizona. He comes in. So the defense has got a lot of upgrades. I think they will be good enough on defense. Not dominant, but 9 starters are back. And then offensively, they'll be potent as long as Caleb Williams stays healthy. And we saw what could happen last year. Remember, Caleb Williams got injured at the start of that Pac-12 title game and ended up taking 6 sacks. He wasn't the same quarterback in that game, and they ended up getting blown out. But if he had stayed healthy, they would have made the playoff last year. They do have to play Notre Dame and Oregon on the road. A couple of games they might be a slight underdog in. But this team's capable. I've got them as my favorite to win the Pac-12, and they are capable of making another run at the playoff.
I think they're a team, if they can crack the 30-point barrier almost every time out, they'll win those games. I mean, it'll be the games that with somebody holds them under 30, if it does happen, that will be the game that they're in trouble.
And I think the defense will be improved enough where maybe that number comes down to 24.
That's a good point. I'm gonna remember that as we go through this. I do want to ask you about Notre Dame because obviously there's been some changes there with what's been going on. Buckner's now down at Alabama. How do you look at Notre Dame?
Well, I'm really bullish on Notre Dame this year. In fact, I think Ohio State's going to have their hands full week 4. You look at them defensively. They are all 3 units rank in my top units. Defensive backs number 9, linebackers number 7. Marcus Freeman knows defense. He's got 8 starters back on that side of the ball. Offensive line, this is a really good group. They've got, where I said Ohio State's got question marks at tackle. Notre Dame doesn't have question marks at tackle. They got Blake Fisher and Joe Alt, 2 guys that the NFL scouts are wild about. This is a veteran offensive line. Receiving core, that's probably your biggest question mark on the entire team. But they move Chris Tyree from running back to slot back because they're so deep at running back. They bring in Tobias Merriweather, who got his feet wet as a sophomore. I think he'll have a better year. And the tight ends look promising. But it's a solid run game. They've got Estime and Price and Ford. And then last year they used a backup quarterback all year in Pine. This year they go to one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Sam Hartman. I mean, this guy did wonders at Wake Forest, and now he's running this offense with the talented supporting cast. They get Ohio State at home. They get USC at home. I can see them winning both those games. The only game I've gotten a true underdog in all year is at Clemson. And if they go 11-1 at that point, I think they'd have a great shot at making a playoff. So watch out for Notre Dame.
I know I did. I might as well just throw this in. Tell everybody your Final Four. It is?
Final Four, I'm going with Georgia, Alabama, never discount Nick Saban, Michigan. They've got the best schedule of the Big Ten East teams. And then I'm going with Clemson. And the thing is, if you look at the ACC this year, Florida State's going to be the preseason favorite to win the ACC and ranked higher in the AP poll at the start of the year. But I like Clemson. And going over the team with Coach Sweeney, he told me that while this defensive line doesn't have the star power of 2018, you remember 2018, they had all those first-round draft picks, one of the best defensive lines in college football. He said this group's actually deeper in talent and experience than that 2018 squad. They've got Carter and Trotter at linebacker. I think bringing in Garrett Riley, who took TCU's defense to new heights last year. He's got Cade Klubnik at QB, Shipley and Moffitt at running back, and a solid offensive line. Their 2 toughest games are Florida State and Notre Dame. They get them both at home. They've lost 1 home game the last 6 years. I've got Clemson favored in all 12 games. So despite the fact they're only number 6 in my power poll, I have them number 2 in the country.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of Clemson's practice before the ACC championship game because I was doing a basketball game down there. A lot of athletes. I was like, wow, a lot of athletes. Phil, where can you get the publication so people can start loading up and getting ready for the season?
I appreciate that, Steve. Now, it's different than past years. In past years, you go to your Walmart or any grocery store and pick it up. But this year, it's exclusively at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. So if you're looking for the brick-and-mortar stores and you want to get the copy in your hands today, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million are the two exclusive locations. Don't waste your gas money looking elsewhere. Or you can go to philsteele.com. And the interesting thing about philsteele.com, I'm going to charge you a shipping charge when you order it. Naturally, it costs to ship things. However, we give you the hard copy, which you order, and then we'll give you the digital copy for free. And the digital copy gets updated all the way through September. So as an example, on the Northwestern page, if you look at the head coach, we've got David Braun as the head coach in the digital version. So we circle players that were out for the year, get both the hard copy and the digital copy at philsteele.com. Once again, if you're out and about looking for it, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million exclusively.
What do you say we do this again about a month in and see how things are going?
Oh, I can't wait, Steve. I always enjoy our conversations. You know I like talking football with you.
Absolutely, Phil. What a pleasure on my part and for the audience. Thanks so much, my friend. The best publication out there for college football, and we appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. It's great talking to you again.